Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Tech4Eva UK Roadshow. I am Charlotte Schöni, Science and Innovation Officer at the Embassy of Switzerland in the UK, and I will moderate today's event. We'll start with an overview of the Femtech industry in the UK, where you learn from Hassan and myself what the healthcare and Femtech ecosystem looks like in the UK and how to land in the UK as a Femtech startup. The session will then be followed by some Q&A, so feel free to use the chat for that. Next, Hassan Chowdhury, Global Digital Health Specialist at DIT, will moderate a discussion with Catherine Davies, who has a broad experience in partnering with the Nhs, which is the National Health Service in the UK. And we will conclude today's event with our last session of the day about investment. Lutz Peterberg will moderate a panel discussion with three investors, Angel Norbach-Ashman, Deepali Nanjia, and Maren Bannon. So as mentioned before, I'm Charlotte Schöni, and with Hassan Chowdhury, we'll introduce you to the UK innovation ecosystem. The UK is considered as the most successful startup location in Europe for several reasons. The first one being that the UK is the leading tech innovation hub in Europe and the third largest in the world. It has also a massive concentration of talent with 3 of the 10 best universities in the world located in Oxford, Cambridge, and in London with Imperial College. Despite COVID and Brexit, the UK strengthened its position worldwide in terms of VC investment and is third in the world behind China and the US. The UK is also a risk-friendly environment, and you'll be surprised to know that it's very easy to set up a company. It only takes 24 hours and costs only £12. The UK also hosts a lot of support programs, including some of the biggest corporates and experts. As a foreign entrepreneur, you can also get a startup visa, which allows you to come to the UK and develop your company here under certain conditions. And finally, the UK is the best country in Europe for turning startups into unicorns. Indeed, in 10 years, the number of unicorns grew 8 times and is now in 2021 over 80. Some of the big ones are Revolut, Delivery, Babylon, and most recently, Hopin. The main reason why the UK is the place to be for startups in Europe is that it's a leader in high-tech markets, such as life sciences, where the top medtech companies have their headquarters. And the UK is also home of the most of the R&D centers. The ICT market is also very big in the UK and the UK is one of the largest ICT markets in the world. It includes software and IT services, fintech, cyber, e-health, mobile, AI, and digital. And last but not least, the creative industries are the fastest growing part of the UK economy. And all of it is backed by the government with its industrial strategy. As mentioned on my previous slide, the health tech sector is quite big in the UK. The health tech investment was second after fintech in 2020, making up just under 12% of all investment into UK tech firms, which makes it the third country in the world for health tech investment raised in 2020 with a record at $2.33 billion. With big pharma companies based in the UK and R&D centers all over the country, the UK is the largest biotech cluster outside the US and has over 3,000 startups and scale-ups, of which around 400 have recorded high growth over the past 2 years. You will know more about it in the next session, but the NHS is the National Health Service in the UK and is the biggest employer in that sector. It serves 65 million people. The UK also has tax credits in R&D and investments, meaning that if companies invest in R&D, as well as if angel investors invest in startups, they get money back. North America has the most Femtech startups and is followed by Europe, with the UK being the second country where the most Femtech startups are. Like everywhere else, the Femtech sector in the UK is getting bigger and bigger. And as mentioned before, the NHS is quite present in that sector and is focusing on some of the most common women's health issues, such as endometriosis, pelvic floor reeducation, and mental health. The government is also making it a priority and will launch soon a women's health strategy, which will invest to tackle the most common issues for women. You can also find several program supports and accelerator with a focus on women's health issues, like the Femtech Lab, which is an acceleration program in the UK, P4 Precision Medicine Accelerator Program, or Digital Health London, which focus on digital health and has supported some Femtech startups in the past. In terms of big success stories, the UK is home to LV, which is designing smart devices for women's health. The company has now raised a total of over $50 million to date, and the NHS prescribes their devices to patients, and the company was awarded several times. Another big success story of the UK is Therapeutics, which was acquired by Bayer in 2020, but you will hear more about it tomorrow as we have Bertolt Hinsen from Bayer on our first session. Another, which is rather new success story, is the Balance app, which is helping women to get fast diagnosis and appropriate treatment for perimenopause and menopause. Since launching in July 2020, the company has raised £50,000 in equity investment, and its app has been downloaded by over 180,000 women in more than 100 countries. So now you've had a quick overview of the innovation ecosystem, you might wonder how the Embassy of Switzerland is helping startups. At the Embassy, we connect the Swiss and British innovation ecosystems with two types of activities. The first one is that we are mandated by Nhs, which is the Swiss innovation agency to support Swiss startups in the UK. We offer them to explore or enter the UK market through a tailored and flexible program for up to 4 weeks. In addition, they also have access to a desk in a co-working space within the Tech City Startup Hub in Shoreditch. Next to this program, we also collaborate with Swiss players such as the EPFL, like today, to build programs in the UK for them. So if you're a startup and would like to engage with us or know more, please get in touch. It's also us who are the point of contact if you'd like to be introduced to some of the speakers for the next 2 days. So please get in touch with us. So now, Hassan, I will pass over to you, and he will give you an overview on how to land in the UK as a Femtech startup when you're scaling your startup. So Hassan, I give it over to you. Let me give you the control.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. It's a real honour to be here with everybody. My role is with the British government to support companies that are coming into the UK market to understand the landscape and to give you as much advice as I can on the digital health sector. But I'm part of a wider team that looks after healthcare and life sciences. So there's a lot of support available for free, a lot of advice. All you have to do is ask. And the Swiss Embassy in the UK are fantastic partners for us. In my short presentation, I'd like to cover some of the things that are not just about Femtech. I think this is generally about digital health. And then in our Q&A discussion, we can narrow it down. But these are important things to note. If you do not understand what's going to come on the next couple of slides, then you won't be able to land as a digital health company, let alone a Femtech company. So the first is that we produce something called the Nhs Long-Term Plan. Everything that we do in the UK is going to be founded on these principles. And the reason why is because we needed to come up with a strategy that recognized that our healthcare system was not sustainable. Too many people coming in needing care, not enough money in the system, not enough people in the system. So we were struggling, and we recognized that. So therefore, we needed to make sure that we pushed the idea of self-care and prevention, so citizens were looking after themselves. That is a very, very big idea within the 10-year plan. Although we don't call it the 10-year plan, we call it the long-term plan, but that is really what it is. Can we integrate services? So why is it that one part of the system is spending money and another part of the system is benefiting, but they don't talk to each other? How do we bring that together? How do we make sure that one part of the system doesn't hurt another part? So, for example, if you have a hospital bed that's stuck, a patient won't leave until they get to social care, and social care doesn't have the money to do so, then that means that bed is blocked. How do you prevent these things? How do you join up the system? And there's lots of things that are important within this. You'll see the diagram, you'll see point 5, technology. It's a very big deal. So if you can provide technology that supports the connections, and also more about self-care and prevention, and importantly, health equality. We don't only want to help certain segments, we want to help everybody. then you're going to be in line with the NHS Long-Term Plan, which is a very important thing to do. I'm just going to move to the next slide. So there's an organization that only came about in the last few years called Nhs X, and it's important to know what they do. So in the UK, we have 4 countries. We have England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Nhs X is very much around England, but whatever happens in England will affect the others. And Nhs X is a team that deals with digital health, digital data technology, all of that area, strategy and commissioning. And these are their 5 missions. Again, can you see, for example, point 2, giving people the tools to access information and services directly so they can best take charge of their own health and care. If this is something that you can support, or if you can support number 3, how do you make sure information about their care is safely accessed wherever it's needed? These are the kind of things that we need. And the very last one, productivity. Can you help reduce the burden on the workforce, which is the first mission? These are the missions that you need to align yourself with. And again, very important that you do. I'm hoping, as Charlotte's put in the chat, that there's some questions coming. We wanted to set rules, but we don't have those rules. No country in the world really has the rules. So we have an agreement, something that we call a guide to good practice. We expect you to do these things, but there's no punishment yet if you don't meet all of these things. There may be individual punishments for data protection and so on, but this is the first time we've managed to gather all of the things that we want innovators to do into one guide. The guide to good practice for digital and data-driven health technologies. I would suggest any company looking at the UK market to be very, very good at all of these things: ethical, clear value proposition, technical assurance, clinical safety. And for that point, we move to the next slide. There's something called the DTAC, the Digital Technology Assessment Criteria. Now, this is a baseline. This is the bare minimum. If you do not meet this bare minimum, if you don't meet the DTAC floor, then eventually, not right now, but it may be in a year or 2, nobody will buy your innovation. So it's been developed. It's still very, very new. But it's important that you get to look at the DTAC and make sure you meet it. And it has lots of different things in it. Clinical safety is key, data protection, technical security, interoperability, and so on. But you need to make sure that the bare minimum, you meet DTAC and exceed it. So even if you've done DTAC, that doesn't mean you're good. It just means you're not bad. Go to the next slide. And I've got an organization here, British organization called Orca. Orca do reviews. They incorporate the DTAC within their reviews. And they also then allow the distribution of health tech. So if you get an Orca review and you get a high percentage, so imagine that I think 70% might be a fail, something like that. You want to get a high score, then others will trust you because you've been validated. This is the kind of thing lots of organizations miss out. They don't realize you need to get your self-credibility in the system, and Orca review is one way of doing so. We move to the next slide. This is tied into the DTAC. It's not entirely separate, but we have an organization, NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and they produced evidence standards for digital health technologies, DHTs as they call them. And they worked with the bodies that you can see the logos, NHS England, Public Health England, MedCity, and digitalhealth.london. So there are 3 levels broadly. If you're a system supporting technology, no one sees you, no one touches you, then you're level 1. If you're informing, then you're level 2. And if you're changing the way decisions are being made, diagnosis as an example, you're level 3. And therefore, the evidence that you need to be taken on in the system is listed within the evidence standards framework. So you need to make sure that you look at this, and the DTAC explicitly references the evidence standards framework. You need to make sure that this is in line. And this is because nobody in the system is ever going to procure you if they think they will look bad. Everything in the system is about reducing risk. I don't want to take risk. I don't want to take something, buy something, put it in front of patients, and then something goes wrong. It's always about, well, who else has validated you? Who else has used you? And it's always about, well, I worked with this professor in Portsmouth. Ah, okay, if you've worked with him and he's referred you, then I'm happy to take you. So I would say that the NHS is the biggest small market in the world. You need to make sure that you have credibility is who you've worked with and who you know. I'll move on to the next slide. So very recently, in the last couple of weeks, Nhs X has produced something for digital transformation, and they've called it What Good Looks Like. And that's because lots of people were doing different things in digital, but nobody was really unified. And what they want is a North Star, something to guide you as you're trying to do this. And what good looks like is still very, very simple, very basic. So you don't expect detail yet. But what it's saying is if you're going to do digital transformation, make sure you have, for example, smart foundations. So on the right-hand side of the schematic, so things that are interoperable. Make sure it deals with safe practice, make sure it supports people, make sure it improves care, make sure it leads to healthy populations, and eventually leads to empowering citizens, because the key is citizens need to be able to look after themselves, if you remember the long-term plan. Now, what good looks like, the reason I mention it is because you will not be able to succeed in the UK if you sell a product and it's not considered to be part of the whole digital landscape. You have to consider the digital landscape and how your solution fits. And you may need to help the system change how it does things to embrace your technology. And that's why digital transformation is actually maybe half of your work and another half is selling your product. So it's not just, hey, look, here's a product, I'm going to sell it to you, goodbye. It's about, okay, how do you work? Where does the data go? Where do patients go? And within the midst of that, how does my product fit? Maybe we need to help change the system a little to make my product more likely. And that's something that pharma companies have been doing for years, helping hospitals move from, for example, an IV drip to a subcut injection. In that same way, you may need to do digital transformation as well. So please keep an eye on what good looks like. We move to the next slide, and I'm running out of time, so I'll just say that the academic health science networks, the AHSNs, are the innovation arm for the NHS. If you do something well in one part of the country, and you'll notice there's 15 areas on that map, if you do something, for example, in South London, which is Health Innovation Network, you would expect somebody to say, oh, this is good, let's see others, and tell them about it. The AHSN network is that organization. They will look at the best innovation, help it spread in an area and spread across the country. So the AHSNs are likely to be your very, very best friends when it comes to doing this kind of work. Some quick points on what is typically required. I'm sure we can cover lots and lots of this when we do our Q&A, but if you look on the bottom right corner, people are always interested, have you already been deployed in the NHS? And do you have a third party who's evaluated you? Oops, just move to the next slide. And this is my email address. I'm very happy to support any company on the cohort. Charlotte and Lutz Petterberg are able to connect you with us. So anything I can do to support you, please let me know. And I'll stop there. Charlotte, shall we move to Q&A then?
Yes, sorry. Every time you moved your mouse, it moved mine as well. So that's why
I'm so sorry. Everyone, that was my fault completely.
No worries at all. So yeah, we have one first question from Siham from Biorhythm that I can read out loud. So in NHS context, when designing a proof of value study, should we consider integrating outcomes identified by DTAC or NICE DHT? Do you want to answer that maybe, Hassan?
Yeah, very quickly. So the DTAC will say, these are the things that we need you to have. We need you to have a clinical safety officer. We need to make sure that you abide by GDPR. It doesn't specify the outcomes. What it does is it refers to the NICE digital health technology framework and saying, based upon that, do what you've got to do. So the answer is, when you're looking at your study and your outcomes, look at the NICE evidence standards framework for digital health technologies. And they are aligned. The DTAC and the NICE DHT are connected. So look at that. Shall we look at the second question, Emmeline? Will the NHS accept clinical trials? Absolutely. There's no danger of you being able to take a clinical trial from any country in the world and bring it to the NHS. No problems at all. The problem isn't about the clinical trial. The problem is, can you take any information that you've done in the real world? So clinical trials are about efficacy. They're about things in ideal conditions. And therefore, what we're looking to do is say, well, can you replicate your efficacy, your clinical trial results in real life, in the real world, with effectiveness? It's those two together that give you your chance. If you just say, look, we've got lots of clinical trials, people will eventually say, but what have you done in real life, and which hospital or which payer has said, yes, we accept? So probably the gold standard is to do the clinical trial wherever you want, but then to do a pilot study in the UK, and not to call it a pilot, because if you get stuck in a pilot, they'll just ask you for more pilots. But to do a real world study, outcome study in the UK, that's what will get you what you need. Hope that answers the question. We have something from Lutz Petter. Following Brexit, do you anticipate divergence of regulation, and would it make medtech certification of business easier than in the EU? I'll be very honest with you. There will eventually have to be some divergence, because those who called for Brexit are looking to prove that there was a value in the difference. And I think that they will perhaps make it slightly more competitive, but it's going to make life difficult, because companies that come to the UK want to go to Europe, or the other way around. People in Europe want to come to the UK, and you've got two regulatory environments. So as long as we can, we'll try and keep there from being a divergence. But when there is a divergence, it will make it harder, I think, because you have to spend money twice. I'm being very honest. I think that when you do come to the UK, there's a lot of advantages, huge advantages, but the divergence is going to be costly, and it's about finding cheap ways to get around that divergence. Should we move to the next question?
Yes, sure.
Cordifio Heart, is it? What would be the first step in engaging with the NHS? When should we take that step? Who are the decision makers? As we know, in the healthcare space, you have to bring everyone to the table. Forgive me, I'm in a room where the lights have switched off, so that wasn't my fault, but I hope you don't mind. The first step is to speak to people who are likely to be either users or beneficiaries of what you do, and they're not the same thing. So I'll give you an example. A hospital might use something, but the beneficiary is the commissioner, because their patients as a whole are better off. The hospital might think, well, we don't care, but they'll do it. So the beneficiary and the user are not the same thing. You have to work out within your workflow, who are the users, who has the pain, and what's happening. And based upon that, you can change, you can adapt what you do to fit the workflow. Because if what you do doesn't fit the way that things happen in the UK, people won't listen at all. What you need is for something that really, really fits the workflow. So we've had lots of things come in from other countries where they've spoken to a clinician, and they said to the clinician, you tell us what to do and we'll adapt what we can to your workflow. And then when it's done and it works, and they've done an outcome study, then they've spread across the country. So for me, the first step is always discussion, and wait until you've done that before you apply for DTAC, before you look at evidence standards framework. Those can come later. Understand the problem and the workflow. That should be the first step. And when it asks who are the decision makers within the NHS framework, sometimes people with no budget are powerful if they're clinical champions and they want something. But the person with the real power is the person who owns the digital strategy. If they think your product is going to destroy their digital strategy, you're not going to get in. It doesn't matter how many people argue for you. You have to make sure what the CCIO, the Chief Clinical Information Officer, and the people on the clinical side are on your side. But the CIO, the person who leads on the digital strategy as a whole, the Chief Digital Officer, that's the person that you need to make sure doesn't mind you. As long as they don't mind you, you're okay. I hope that makes sense. Shall I move on to the next question?
Yeah, we have two last questions.
Nimrod. Nimrod, where can we receive information to support health economic claims? There's lots of information actually available. There's one called the PSSRU. I've just put that for you in the chat, which provides you with baseline information on tariffs and costs and so on. But any university or any health economic unit will have all of this information available. And I've seen companies go to the Academic Health Science Network, the HSN, say that this is something powerful, and the HSN sometimes funds your health economic studies if they really believe in you. So there's lots of help, but I would go to the HSN first before spending any money, and they can advise. But if you're in the position where you've got the funding, got the finance, want to move quickly, then go to a university health economic department. University of York, as an example, might be a good one. And they'll be able to provide you with all the information you need for health economics. There's also the Health Economic Unit. I'll just write that in, Economic Unit, which is in Midlands and Lancashire Commission Support Unit. And they would also be able to provide you with this kind of help. So another question, we have SIHEM, Biorhythm. Do we need to have regular solution, MHRA clearance, to require ORCA review, or can it be based on clinical study data? Sometimes it's best to go to ORCA first, find out the questions, find out what you haven't done, because it's some things you just won't realize you have to do. For example, we have the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO. So if you collect any data and hold any data on patients, you need to register with the ICO. And if you haven't registered with them, then you're in breach. But it may be that no one told you. People only told you about the MHRA or NICE. So it's good to go to ORCA. It's good to go to one of the frameworks, procurement frameworks. Look at all of the requirements and use that as your tick list. So I would go and do all of that, find out all the things you have to do, and then if you need to go and get your MHRA clearance, your UKCA mark, and so on, then you can go do it. But all of them will happily answer the question. MHRA will answer it, NICE will answer it, ORCA will answer it. You can find out what you need to do before you do it. So don't rush, find out first. We've got another one, Petronella. How is UK dealing with digital apps like potential digital therapeutics? This is the reason I mentioned ORCA. ORCA provide the ability to not only be assessed, but to be distributed. So they've developed, I think, 60% of the NHS have got app stores or digital formularies where someone can prescribe the app based upon the evidence. So you could be a family doctor, a general practitioner, we call GPs. You could be in Liverpool. You could be dealing with a patient with some issue with their heart, chronic heart failure. And you look at ORCA and say, I want to find an app that does this. They'll give you a list. They'll say, oh, there's an app there that has an 83% score. I want that one. And then you click a button and it's prescribed to the patient. So that's the route at the moment, which is why it is important to get into the distribution network that ORCA provides. And eventually the DTAC will be the thing that helps you get credibility, but you need distribution. And that's why ORCA is useful.
Maybe one last question, and then we can move on to the next session.
Got you. Petronella, what are some success stories when it comes to prevention through digital health apps, if they exist in the UK? What's the true appetite for prevention? Is anyone willing to pay for it? I think that's a fantastic question. No one wants to pay for anything. And if they can, they would get away with letting someone else pay for it. So what we've got is a change in the system to something called ICS, Integrated Care Systems, which is, and I'm being very blunt here, it's where you bring every single organization in a place. So for example, you bring the whole of South London, the whole of Manchester, you bring them together and say, you, by doing this, are hurting another part of the system. You, by doing this, are making yourself benefit, but you're hurting the system as a whole. You will all be in this room and you will solve it, or we will shoot you. That's what the ICS is. It's a way of bringing everyone together and pooling financial risk. And that's why prevention is now going to be easier for you to get to pay. Because when you say you should pay for prevention, the hospital will say, but we get paid for treating them. Why would we want to spend all the money on prevention? But that's because the GP doesn't have the time to deal with them. And the GP is saying, look, we're stretched. You've got to stop patients coming to us. And that's why the system will start to work out. Well, let's try and avoid all of these patients coming into the system. So you need the ICS to look at what you're doing and think, yes, this is going to prevent strain on the system. And what you have to do is you have to not just use the word prevention, but what's the money saved? And if you can, you've got to do the money saved in year. No one wants to spend money now and 3 years later see the benefit. People are looking for immediate in-year savings. And that's what you've got to do. If you can make a health economic argument, as well as a clinical effectiveness argument, as well as a usability argument, people won't argue with you. And thank you so much, Sihem, for your kind comments. I'm speaking quickly to give you as much as I can, but I appreciate time is short. So I'll pause there and hand back to you, Charlotte.
Thank you. So the next session now is moderated by you, Hassan, so you can come back to the session. And we have also Catherine Davis. I think
hello.
Here.
Can you hear me?
So
I hope so.
Yes. All good.
Great.
Catherine, we can hear you and see you. So Charlotte, thank you for that. Catherine, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind to give a brief introduction to yourself, to Monticle, to what you're doing, Women of Wearables. I know that you are a fantastic ally in the system, so please don't be too modest.
Oh, you're very kind. So I've been involved with the NHS one way or another for over 10 years now. I held an executive role at one of the regulators, and I was responsible for overseeing patient choice and competition across the system. And I also spent some time working at a large NHS Foundation Trust in London, just to experience what life was like actually working within a hospital, and that was fascinating. But for the last few years, I have been running my own business, and I help innovative companies that want to partner with the NHS. So I help innovators to understand the landscape across the NHS and to craft their message so that they can have the greatest impact in the conversations that they have with people in the NHS. And where I think there's mutual benefit, I'll connect companies with contacts of mine across the system. I also do a bit with Women of Wearables. It's an absolutely fantastic network. And I'm really passionate about seeing a better gender balance across the health tech ecosystem. So I also host a podcast called Women in Health Tech Show, where I interview interesting people from the NHS and innovative companies as well as investors. So the second season of that is about to start. So you can find that on iTunes if you're interested.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And we've got some time for a discussion. And we've got time for a Q&A afterwards. But if you wouldn't mind, I'd love it if we could take questions as we go.
Yeah.
So for everyone in the cohort, please don't be shy. Put questions in to the chat as we go on. And Catherine and I will have a conversation. And hopefully that will spark some thinking. Now, there's some questions already on the slide, 3 bullet points. I'll just read them out. How the NHS supports health tech startups. What are the innovation needs for the NHS, and what are the tips on how to approach the NHS? So what I was thinking of doing, Catherine, is asking you to maybe give us a lead in to the topic. I think you've got some slides as well.
Yeah.
And if you wouldn't mind touching on those 3 points, and when you're done, then we'll go through some more conversation. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. And just to reiterate, I'm really happy for people to jump in and ask questions and send comments through if they have experiences either in the UK or outside the UK that it would be helpful to share, then feel free to do that. And if we don't have time to get into the detail of the issues that you're grappling with, then do feel free to contact me afterwards on LinkedIn, or I have an email address at the end. So, yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. So over to you.
Thank you. So if we start about how the NHS supports health tech startups, there's so much support available, and it's definitely worth spending the time just working out a bit of a strategy before you kind of go ahead and try to set up partnerships with the NHS. So it's a complex landscape. So on this slide, I've tried to help you understand that landscape a little bit. The other thing to be aware of is that it does change quite regularly. So we seem to be very keen on organising and reorganising different bits of the NHS regularly. So once you've managed to capture how it works in a slide like this, then it can all change again, and you have to kind of adapt a little bit. But it is really important, I think, to work out who in the system you need to focus on, because you can't focus on everybody. It's too much, it's too overwhelming. So focus on one bit of the system in particular, and then think about how you can solve a problem that the NHS as a system is really worried about. If you can do that, you're more likely to have success and save yourself a lot of time and energy. So just very briefly, in this slide, what we've set out are the different bits of the system. So you can see that we have national organisations that sort of sit above the system. But the most significant part of the system at the moment, where everybody's focused on, are the organisations that Hassan mentioned earlier, integrated care systems, or ICSs. And as he said, those are regional groups of providers and commissioners that are coming together to take a regional view about the strategic commissioning and provision of NHS care in a local area. So at the moment, people are a little bit distracted because ICSs are being formed, key people are being appointed into post, and they're having to decide on their strategy and their plans for the short and medium term. So a lot of attention is focused on that at the moment. So one of the particular challenges that people I talk to are facing right now is that the purchasers in the system are a little bit distracted by this reorganisation. And of course, they're all incredibly busy because of COVID as well. So that's just some context to bear in mind. So when
Catherine,
Catherine,
sorry, just say that you can control the slides, just letting you know.
Oh, great. I don't know how I do that, actually. Anyway, okay. So when you're thinking about who you want to talk to, think about whether your innovation is likely to be of interest to a hospital or somebody else in the system, so a GP or some other type of organisation in the system. And it's a little bit simplistic, but it's just quite helpful to help you position yourself in terms of where you have those initial conversations. And then once you've worked out who in the system is most likely to be interested, then you need to figure out exactly what problem of theirs that you're solving. So a lot of innovators that I speak to have fantastic innovations that perhaps solve a problem that they personally have experienced or someone in their family or network has experienced. But what you need to do is take a step back and think about what NHS system-wide problem you're actually solving, as well as the solution that you've come up to for the person that you're helping. So let me. How do I move these slides, Hassan? I'm not actually sure how I do it.
I can do it for you. It's fine.
Oh, thank you. I only have a few, so it's not too many. Yeah. So it's worth just understanding some of the biggest problems in the NHS, because if you can position yourself as a solution to some of these big problems, then you're much, much more likely to get traction. If you're not solving one of these big problems, you can still get traction, but you need to do it in a slightly different way that I'll come back to. So before COVID, some of the key problems were around access. So getting people having access to the care that they needed. So in the NHS, you'll be aware that it's a universal healthcare system. So broadly, we treat all types of conditions and illnesses, and it's obviously free at the point of use to people who need it. So it's difficult as people get sicker, as the population grows, as the population ages, to continue to provide all of the care that people need. And so what happens, obviously, is that people end up needing to wait to access the care that they need. So concerns around access are really significant. Now, as you can imagine, with COVID, everything had to stop for a period of time. And so that made this access problem even worse. So now what we're seeing is people are really struggling to get appointments with GPs. Accident and emergency departments are extremely busy, and waiting lists for elective care are getting really, really long, quite frightening, actually, the longest that they've really been ever. So to the extent that your technology can help with one of those problems, then that's a really good hook for you to start having conversations with key people in the system. So, for example, if you can care for people remotely out of hospital or help them manage their condition themselves, then this is obviously a key area that helps alleviate the access problem. So do think about that. We are also very focused at the moment on cancer. We're trying to improve cancer outcomes in this country. And one of the things that obviously we can do there is have earlier cancer diagnostics. So I saw on the list of people in the program at the moment, one of you has innovation that helps diagnose cancer earlier. So that's really interesting, very likely to be of interest to the system. So I also mentioned demand. So demand in the system is going up and up and up. So again, innovations that help manage demand, and that might be enabling people to care for themselves for longer, or innovations that help make sure that the people who are in the system really need the particular intervention that we're focused on. So for example, at the moment, what's happening is that people are going to GPs with musculoskeletal pain. They're then being referred to a waiting list at a hospital for a potential hip operation or knee operation. They're needing to wait 12 to 18 months for a first outpatient appointment, which happens even before they have their kind of MRI and diagnostics. And what we're finding is some of those people actually don't need an operation. So there's demand in the system that isn't quite in the right place. So a lot of those people could actually manage with physiotherapy for a period of time. So technology that helps triage or treat people who are in the system already, again, is one that's really desirable at the moment. The NHS, like most other countries, has a chronic shortage of workforce, particularly nurses are a problem. So again, helping the workforce to thrive, to do the best they can with the time that they do have in the system is really, really important. And there's also a lot of work at the moment around system integration in terms of different bits of the NHS being able to come together and communicate with each other, but also in the sort of IT sense as well. So to make sure that where a hospital is using different platforms or different apps, there's some way that they can actually integrate with each other, so you don't have lots of clinicians receiving information onto particular devices that then don't end up in the hospital system. So there's quite a lot there. So kind of post-COVID, what we're seeing is a huge amount of pressure on the system. There's been a very significant effort on COVID vaccinations in this country, and now we're going through more vaccinations with boosters and so on. And I think what's happened is problems that were already there have become much, much worse, much, much more quickly. So there really, really is a need for innovation in the system. But at the same time, the people who will implement innovation at the system are under a huge amount of pressure, and they're tired and stressed after 18 months of, challenging situation. So it can be difficult sometimes to have those conversations that require people to have the mental energy to think about doing things a bit differently. I'm just going to pause and have a quick look at some of the questions. Hassan, are there any ones in particular that you think I should answer just now?
We've had one question which is quite a painful question.
Yeah.
And it's from, and forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, Siuvina Sahi.
Yeah.
An ex-junior doctor from the NHS who approached the trust that she was at to co-develop an idea. And the innovation department at that trust wanted to sign an agreement where the trust received 90% of profits over £100,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is horrible, right? And a shock. So this raises the question, does the NHS expect royalties? Equity in return for partnership, and what does that startup relationship typically look like from a financial perspective?
Yeah, wow, that's a really, really interesting question, actually. Funnily enough, I was having a conversation with someone else recently who also found themselves in quite a challenging situation where someone within a trust had really sponsored a particular innovation, and it had all been quite informal. And then they wanted to formalize the arrangement, and the trust wanted a really significant share of the revenue for a significant period going into the future. And it all got quite fraught, and they actually had to bring in a third party to try and help resolve the dispute there. So the answer to the question is that there isn't custom and practice on that yet, because it really is all quite new. And I think it does therefore rely on people having good relationships and being willing to be sensible. The interesting thing about the person I was speaking to, who was the innovator, was that she wasn't quite sure exactly what she wanted out of the relationship with the NHS organisation. So she wanted them to partner with her, but she wasn't sure exactly what she wanted. So I would say that try to come up with a bit of a plan. So if you have, say you run a pilot within a trust and they invest time and potentially money getting that to work, it does work well. And then at the end, you want to then expand beyond the pilot to have something that, for example, can be adopted by other trusts. So with software, a lot of the time, there's a sort of a licensing fee that would be payable along with some sort of upfront charge to get the piece of software into the system and up and running. And the fact that you've done a pilot with one trust will definitely make it easier to sell then into other trusts. So you are using the support of your original organization to then commercialize your innovation. So do have a think about what you actually want that to look like. Are you willing to offer the NHS organization that you start with something so that then they're invested in it? And they may be more likely to help work with you to really get it embedded into the system. Or maybe you don't, and maybe you can be upfront with that at the beginning. But then you might need to make a contribution to their costs to actually get your pilot up and running and to measure the impact of that.
So thank you, Catherine. If you wouldn't mind, we just remove the current slide so we can all see each other a little bit clearer, and let's have a conversation. Just to finish off the point, I think that was written in the chat, Sihem's come in to say, I guess it will depend if the innovator is part of the NHS or not, whether they're an employee, and if forefront IP is developed through the project. And I can understand exactly where that's coming from. My tuppence on this is to say that if the person is being asked for that kind of equity and that kind of profit share when there's an existing intellectual property, that doesn't make sense. But what I'm seeing now, and I'm going to ask Catherine if you're seeing it as well, a bit more desperation from trusts because revenue is tight and they can see that there's opportunities from health tech and everyone's hype about health tech. So maybe are NHS trusts thinking that they're missing out on the gold rush and that's why they're being a little bit more aggressive?
Yes, I definitely think there's something about that. I also think that, some NHS organisations feel that it is quite risky to engage with innovators. And so they're trying to manage the risk in some way and ensure that there is a sort of commensurate reward. I mean, I think 90% of revenue share seems a little excessive. But yes, Hassan, I think you're right that everyone wants to be at the table. And I think that should be possible. In an ideal world, you are trying to create a situation in which everybody wins and everyone is better off as a result of the innovation. But it is just still early days in terms of working out exactly how to commercialize that.
So we'll wait for more questions from the cohort. But let me ask you this question, Catherine.
Yeah.
Do you have a pithy, short prescription that will work for most femtech companies to consider? And the reason I ask is because femtech is obviously on the rise. Yeah? Lots of money now being put into femtech when, to be honest, historically, there's been a real neglect of female founders and femtech.
Yeah.
Do you see that there's something that is, if you like, a unifying prescription that would work for all of these companies? Or do you think it's very much case-by-case basis?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in my podcast, I talk about this quite a lot, actually. Why is there not more focus on care, healthcare provided to women in the system? And I think there's something around the fact that in the NHS, when we're spending public money, we try to be fair and we somehow try to distribute money in a way that benefits everybody. And perhaps that has been a reason why we haven't wanted to focus specifically on, menopausal care or even fertility, where we've really wanted to kind of ration the amount of money that's made available because there are demands, on other bits of the system. So I think the reasons why we haven't had such a focus on femtech is probably very interesting. And, there's probably not just one reason either. I think as well at the moment, part of the difficulty for femtech companies can be that the system is so hot and overloaded that anything that brings more people into the system who weren't there before is potentially quite problematic. So if you think of something like, menopause care, a lot of women are just expected to just be quiet and get on with it. That's the way it's always been. And I don't think it's right. I think it takes people out of the workforce. I don't think it's fair. But at the moment, trying to, introduce new types of diagnostics and new types of treatment for women with menopause, going through the menopause who aren't currently treated, can be quite problematic when the system is already struggling significantly to deal with the people who are already in the system. And it is a very short-sighted view, but nonetheless, I think it is what it is. But I think we're starting to have the conversation more, which is really important, that we talk about how to make things work better and come up with innovative, clever, simple, radical ways of making the system work better for everybody and ensuring that everybody can have the care they need.
Catherine, can I come in on that then?
Yeah.
I've got this bias, right? Because my background is data. My bias is that if you can't prove a burden and a pain with numbers, with money, with activity, with those things, then it's very difficult to make a case in the NHS. And then therefore the problem is when you've got a Femtech issue and you haven't been able to quantify the health economic argument, the clinical argument, the effectiveness argument, you're kind of locked out. Is that the case? Do you feel that's the case?
So I think that is definitely a challenge. As to whether there is or isn't data on that, I think it is starting to change. So again, just to use the menopause example, I think it's quite interesting that now we're starting to see that a lot of women, so people are working for longer, and a lot of women are having to take time out of work to manage symptoms themselves at home. You can calculate the cost of that. That's an impact in the economy if people who would otherwise be able to work aren't able to work because of a health condition that they're suffering from. Of course, the difficulty is the bit of the economy that's affected isn't necessarily the bit of the system that will have to fund the care for those people, and that's a problem that you always have, because of siloed budgets. But I definitely think it's possible to start putting those arguments together. And also there is something about, if you're not able to access care that you need early on, things can get worse, and then you can end up coming into the system later with problems that are more significant and more expensive to treat.
And to that note, we have a comment from Elizabeth Gazda, who makes a very fair point. No one asked for that level of data proof for men's health. Is it fair to say that with Femtech we have to be creative about how we establish the burden? As an example, women have a direct cost, right, with this particular condition that leads to them having hospital care. But there's also an indirect cost with them being out of work, and then an indirect cost where you're more likely to contract another condition which has its own problems. So as an example, brittle bones, right? Menopause, which leads to falls with fractured neck of femur. And that leads to hip replacement, and that's a cost. I think that creativity in how we make the case for Femtech hasn't been something I've seen much of. Have you?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think it is starting. So I'm definitely seeing it being discussed more. There's more willingness to talk about it. And people are now, I think, starting to do a bit more analysis in that area, but I feel like it is quite a recent thing. So, for instance, I don't know if there's QALY's analysis, for example, quality adjusted life year analysis on, the impact of some of these interventions that we're talking about, menstrual care, menopausal care. So I think that it can be quite difficult. I think that there are other bits of Femtech where it's a bit easier. So, for example, I know that there are quite a lot of innovations around helping women to manage their care when they're pregnant, for example. So that means that they need less intervention from the maternity team at their local hospital and so on. And that's kind of easier to discuss with people because this issue about keeping people away from hospital if they don't need to be there is a really hot topic at the moment. So that type of Femtech, is much easier to discuss with people in the system.
Thank you, Catherine. So forgive me, I'm going to take us back to the Q&A. Again, the light around me has switched off.
You have to do a little dance for us.
I'm waving like a bird at the moment. So one other point from Elizabeth Gazda. Let's not overthink this, people. If this was ED, erectile dysfunction, it would be a global emergency. I don't think there's anyone who's going to disagree. We've got two things that I'd like to put forward, one from Sihem and one from Andrea. So Sihem asks, given the NHS organisation change in terms of commissioning groups, who will have the buying power / who will be the budget holder within a trust, for example? So that's question one. And then question two from Andrea, given this complex scenario, is there a place for patient advocacy groups or a push from end users?
So given the reorganisation, who is the buyer? What I'm saying at the moment is that the situation is quite in flux. And within large hospitals, they are in the middle of these systems and they are becoming, it seems, increasingly influential in the systems. So obviously it depends a little bit on what your particular innovation is, whether it's something that would be used in a hospital setting or more likely to be used by a GP. But I'm seeing that hospitals are becoming actually increasingly powerful across the system. And so routes into contacts in the hospital, I think, can be very useful. You mentioned before, Hassan, CIOs, and I totally agree with that. But sometimes there are other routes in as well, depending a little bit on what your innovation is. So, for example, it might be possible to approach clinicians directly. If you go on to, even on Twitter, for example, you'll see lots of NHS clinicians are very active on Twitter. People are often really, really passionate about their specialties. So you can start conversations on social media and then take them offline, and that can sometimes be quite a good way in. One of the things that I'd say is really important is that you do need to be really patient. Somebody mentioned before that startups don't have time to wait for the NHS, and I totally get that. That's why I think sometimes it might be better to also have other strategies, like working with independent sector organisations as well. Or other bits of the sort of health ecosystem rather than just focusing on the NHS, because I know that can make investors quite nervous as well. But it is worth saying you do need to be patient. So the fastest that I've ever managed to see an NHS organisation adopt the technologies of one of my clients was 4 months, and that was because there really was an absolute emergency. Normally, you're looking at 6, 8, 9 months at a minimum to really get into the nitty-gritty of how you get your innovation into a particular part of the system. So you have to be patient, and you have to understand that you need to have values that align with the person you're speaking to in the NHS, and not be in too much of a rush to actually sell your product or your service. So it really is worth building relationships with people and asking them, is this the sort of technology that your organisation would think about using for the patients it serves? What do you see as the barriers? Do you have budget for it? Having those conversations early with people, and then just being willing to be patient. You really, really do need to be patient. If you're a super impatient person, then perhaps this isn't the part of the system to focus on too much at the beginning.
So Catherine, forgive me, I'm going to go back a little, because you did mention Petronella's question about timing, right?
Yeah.
And there was a part of the question which I didn't give to you.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how we can accelerate timing to create win-win situations? And I think that question is driven by the fact that startups have got burn rates. They've got to worry about where they put their effort and for how long.
Yeah.
So accelerating timing to create win-win situations. Any advice?
So I think it really is about trying to help your NHS partner do what they're trying to do, rather than trying to get them to stop doing what they're trying to do and focus on what you're trying to do. And that really is about creative, strategic thinking. And that involves talking to people and really understanding what it is that their problems are, what they're trying to solve at the moment. So, for example, before you get ready to sort of really do a push on the commercial side, spend the time to listen to what people are telling you and really try and think about how what they're telling you, what that means for you. So, for example, recently I was talking to a trust that was saying they had this problem with a very long waiting list. So what was happening was no one was in touch with patients between the point of referral from primary care and the time that the patient had their first outpatient appointment, which could take 12 or 18 months. And they were saying, we want to be in touch with patients, to tell them what's happening, to offer them some care if there's something they need in the meantime that we can offer them. And they were trying to find an innovative company that could help solve that particular problem. And I was in touch with a few companies that were in that space, but they didn't do exactly that thing. So they didn't want to step forward and offer to fix that particular problem because they wanted to focus on the one thing that they were focused on doing. And I understand why they wanted to do that, but that was a little bit of a lost opportunity, I think. So sometimes you really need to listen to what people are trying to do, to figure out how you can help them, and then just be willing to take an opportunity whenever it's presented to you.
Thank you. Great advice. Can I just confirm that there's two questions I think we need to give answers to?
Yeah.
One was Andrea's. Is there a push from patient advocacy groups?
Oh, yes.
End users.
Yeah.
And there's an additional one from Nimrod, which is there a women's health dedicated department in the NHS who are considering priorities for feminine conditions?
So on the patient groups one, I think that is a really good question. So I have seen that work quite well before, where clinicians working at teaching hospitals are also involved with the universities in that particular area, and also involved with third sector organisations, so charities that represent patients. There was someone that I was involved with recently whose expertise was obesity. So if you can find who that person, those sorts of people are, they are really powerful people to bring into your network and your conversations, because they can help you understand how to pull all of this together. To the extent that patients really want something, you can definitely create some leverage that helps with conversations. So the third sector, charities in general, I think, do have a really key role to play. Also in terms of being super connectors themselves and being able to put you in touch with the right people in the system. So to the extent that there is a charity that's interested in the area that you can help with, definitely look them up and find out who the key players are. So I think that can be really powerful.
I was just going to say that you mentioned super connectors. So I think maybe the cohort will benefit from us naming some of these super connectors to get an idea. So I'll go first if it helps. Someone that I think is very, very important in Femtech in the UK is Jenny Thomas, who leads on the Digital Health London Accelerator. She's been a real passionate advocate for Femtech and women's stuff. And I was going to say, as an unusual one, this is someone called Dr. Masood Ahmed, who is in West Birmingham and the Black Country, which is 4 CCGs that have merged, which is 1.5 million population. And the reason I mention him is because he's a convergence of, he's a chief medical officer, he's the CCIO, and he's also the CTO, the chief technology officer for the AHSN for the West Midlands. So he's what you might call a jackpot, where you hit one thing and you get lots of different things, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that I'm pointing people to. Catherine, what kind of people would you point to as super connectors and people who are important in the Femtech scene?
Yeah. I think it depends a little bit on the specialty. So another person who I always find to be very helpful is Clive Flashman. I don't know if you've come across Clive.
I love Clive, yes.
Yeah. So very helpful, very well connected, involved with Orca, involved with a large group of commissioning organisations in the south of England. Always very helpful to connect with him. I can find his we can find his LinkedIn profile and send that through. Clive will thank me for getting lots of new connections on LinkedIn, I'm sure, but he is always super helpful. So I mean, that's the other thing that I would recommend doing, is to literally spend a morning on a page doing a bit of research to find out who are the movers and shakers, who are the thought leaders in your area, who are the people that people are listening to. Do that little bit of research and then just reach out and connect with those people. People in the NHS on the whole, although things happen very slowly, I generally find friendly and willing to talk to you. If they're really busy, then they won't. So don't take it personally if people aren't able to get back to you. Just assume it's because they've got too much going on rather than they don't want to talk to you personally. But when they do get back to you, they're generally incredibly willing to have conversations and very helpful.
Can I just say on that point, what I found useful is you speak to one person, and then when you go to the next, you say, this person told me to speak to you. And that's the way you're doing it, right?
Yeah, just ask them, who else should I be speaking to? I'm not looking to do a hard sell of my technology at the moment. I'm really just looking to learn what the problems are in the system and figure out how I can help, and come from a place of, being genuine and authentic in your communications, and you'll find that works well. I just always wanted to, so on this, it's what's in it for them, any advice on how to successfully engage with them. Just be authentic, and people are sort of public spirited when they work in the NHS. If they didn't sort of passionately believe in the NHS and the system and getting things to work well for patients, they'd be off doing something else entirely.
I would completely agree. There's a question that we've missed earlier on when I was putting some links in. Yoni Solutions, Virginia. Are the fertility treatments always reimbursed by the NHS? And it says including all of the tests during the treatment, or will you need to meet certain criteria to be eligible? And I just point out that we are running out of time.
Yes. So very quickly on that one. And then there's another question that we missed as well that I'll just come back to. On the fertility treatment, it varies area by area. So each local commissioning area has its own budget, and it has quite significant discretion to decide how exactly to spend that budget. So the number of cycles that are available and what stage you have to be at will vary quite a lot from one area to another. So it's not straightforward, although we call it a national health system. It is actually quite localized, and there's quite a lot of variation in it. The other question, Hassan, was the one about, is there a women's health part of the Department of Health?
From Nimrod.
Yeah, so there isn't one as far as I know, although the former Secretary of State, Matt Hancock, was interested in women's health. And I think, Hassan, you may have mentioned this already, that there was a consultation on a strategy for women's health in the UK. So it's definitely an area that the government is turning up the volume on. But as far as I'm aware, there isn't a separate unit that deals just with that in the system yet.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. There are lots of conversations about what we should do, but there's no unifying form. So I think what we do need is to leave the cohort with some golden rules about what to do. And I think, Catherine, you've given all of those golden rules, but towards the end of this conversation, we'll just try and summarize them. One last chance for anyone who has any questions. While we've got the wonderful Catherine Davies, please put your questions into the chat. We have 5 minutes to go before we end. And I'm going to ask you, Catherine, this is a chair's privilege for me to ask Catherine. I think that Femtech is, let's face it, no longer a niche. I think that's the phrase that people are using, right?
Yeah.
Is it helpful to use the phrase Femtech? Or, should we just be calling it healthcare, or health and care, or is there still a value in calling it Femtech?
I know, it's like that question of should you describe someone as a female founder, or should you just describe them as a founder? I mean, it would be lovely just to be able to describe it as healthcare and for it to be part of the ecosystem in the same way that everything else is, but I don't really think it is there yet. And I sometimes worry a little bit that if you don't focus on it, it does just get forgotten. It's too easy to just wrap it up with everything else, and then it doesn't have the profile that I think it deserves. So I think it is worth calling out separately.
Thank you, Catherine. I can't disagree with anything that you've said at all today. I think it's been great having you. We have one more question, and we'll make this our last. Petronella, again, how should we approach prevention solutions with the NHS? Anyone who's done this successfully? And I think Petronella asked that slightly earlier. Have we got any other success stories and case studies about this?
So the Public Health England team has just been reorganised a little bit, and I'm not exactly sure where everybody has landed, but I think they were starting to do some really interesting work on obesity prevention, for example, and that was trying to encourage people to eat more healthily and exercise better. And then in the end, just disincentivizing manufacturers of foods from having too much sugar. So we have the sugar levy now in the UK. So I think that's an example of where there really was an appetite for being serious about prevention and really trying to do more on obesity. So no doubt there's lots of learning on exactly what's happened in that area. So that might be something that's worth looking at.
Thank you, Catherine. I was actually involved. Sorry, I was involved with a lot of that work.
Yeah.
And I remember the argument was, can we medicalize obesity? So don't call it obesity, call it the different things that come out as conditions as a result of obesity, diabetes as an example. And then also to do the health economic arguments. So the medicalizing of obesity, which really the pharma companies led on because they had drugs for it, turned into that plus the economic arguments. And I think that's at the heart of what we've really been covering. So Catherine, in the 2 or 3 minutes we have remaining, if you wouldn't mind summarizing your key points, your key golden rules, and your final comments before we hand over to Lutz Petter.
Sure. So I think in summary, I would say be patient, think about what system level problem your innovation solves, and then have the confidence to reach out to people and help them understand that you're a part of the solution. And at the moment, there is really an appetite for solutions because at a time of great crisis, there's great opportunity as well.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think you've done a great job of explaining how difficult it is to get this happening, but you've also given us some hope.
Yeah,
I think
that's
what we need.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's a good balance. If you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to give my own final thoughts, which is to say that the UK is a wonderful place for you to set up as a founder. The UK will do lots of things to support you. But once it does get you on there, there's a lot of hustle and a lot of hard work needed, a lot of miles that you have to run on your own. So as long as you know that support is there, the guidance is there, the advice is there, but there's a lot of hard miles to do, I think the UK is a wonderful place to be. But there's no easy answers, there's no silver bullets, and it is all about taking the advice where you can get it. I do recommend you have a good chat with Catherine, and on the slide you'll see that Catherine's email address at Monticle is available. If you'd like to speak with her about partnering with the NHS, please send an email to catherinedavies@monticle.co.uk. I'm available at the DIT to give you the kind of advice that you need, but generally I'm going to be pointing you to people like Catherine in the system or your Clive Flashman. So I do hope you take advantage. And I'm going to say I hope you have a wonderful London Tech Week. Thank you so much to the Embassy of Switzerland in the UK for having us here. I wish you all the best, and I hand over to Lutz Petterberg, Head of Science and Innovation. Thank you so much.